Think of your children. Oh, you must have done something to him for him to treat you this way. And even the 1 in 9 women who do speak out also grapple with guilt. And people turn around and say, why didn't you leave earlier? But people don't want silence. These women want to speak out. And maybe we should stay silent if when we speak, we're promoting these toxic stereotypes that no legislation will get rid of. And if we can't remain silent, let us change our narrative, the narrative of who we are or what our position should be and what we deserve. We are used to Europe reacting to crises very quickly in a united way. Isn't violence against women a crisis?
Thank
you very much. Madam Insir from the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament. The floor is yours.
Colleagues, I could shout at the top of my lungs, but it wouldn't compare to the cries of women and girls suffering right now. Women and girls face various forms of violence throughout their lives, including physical violence, threats, psychological violence, sexual violence, socioeconomic violence. The reason for this, we are women and girls, we are female. Each year, over 2,300 women in Europe are killed by their partner or ex-partner. In our union, 31% of women are survivors of physical or sexual violence. In the EU, in 2015, more than 90% of rape victims and 80% of sexual assault victims were women and girls, while nearly all perpetrators, 99%, were male. Behind each statistic is a person whose life, freedom and dreams have been shattered. Colleagues, it has been an honor to lead the fight for the EU's first historic directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence along so many strong feminists, but this is just the beginning. However, it is shameful that some member states rejected the inclusion of consent-based rape legislation. While I expected misogynistic policies from the far right and national conservatives, it is particularly disgraceful that those who claim to be feminists have acted against the inclusion. One major obstacle was President Emmanuel Macron in France. Only yes means yes. This must be stated clearly and enriched in law. The horrific experiences of Gisèle Pelicot must mark the turning point in recognizing the necessity of consent-based rape legislation in France and across the EU. Colleagues, we need a Lex Gisèle Pelicot law, legislation that ensures that only yes means yes.
Thank you. Now, Madame de la Pisa-Carrion for Patriots for Europe. Thank you.
Presidente.
Mr. President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, today the women of Europe are living in fear. Attacks by an intimate partner or in your family are a terrifying thing. Not in peace in your home or in public. I'm not saying this is not happening, but the reality in Spain, the number of sexual attacks increased by 14% a year over the last decade, and yet we are living with inconsistencies like reducing the sentences for sexual perpetrators and public denunciations about somebody kissing someone in public and yet turning a blind eye to criminal offenders. What we're doing is not enough. We're actually helping criminals and presenting them as victims. Criminals are pleading that their social circumstances are what made them a criminal, and so the sentence is shortened. I'm sure Spanish people will know what I'm talking about. We've had a law for 20 years now against violence against women, but in fact this just turned women against men and hasn't reduced the number of victims. So I think we should leave ideological battles aside and just face the realities that women are experiencing.
Thank you. Now the floor goes to Madame Sberna from the European Conservatives and Reformists Group. The floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much.
Onorevoli colleghi.
Ladies and gentlemen, the silence that you just heard is the silence of millions of women and the silence they experience, the silence of fear, humiliation, isolation, the silence of those who have lost their voice and cannot cry out for help. But we have to shatter this silence with strength and determination and specific action. The numbers are horrifying. 1 out of 3 women has been the victim of physical or sexual violence at some point in her life. And we know that behind these statistics are stories and destroyed families, mothers, women, sisters, daughters, friends. These are people who are asking for justice, protection, and attention, and those who represent them in the institutions have the right to defend them, to be their voice, to be their strength and hope. Every year, the European Parliament organizes the Gender Equality Week in order to take stock of the results achieved and to come up with new measures. I'm a vice president that has an initiative in this, and I'd like everyone to contribute with their thoughts and ideas so that all reports are believed and so that we cannot have attenuating circumstances. Women's dignity is not negotiable. There are no traditions, religions, ideologies that can justify a single act of violence. We will not stop our efforts until every single woman is free to live without fear.
Thank you, Madam Hayer, for Renew Europe Group. The floor is yours.
La honte.
Shame. It's not up to us to have that. Giselle Pellico and the trial of the 51 shows that the words should be heard as often as possible. Dominic Pellico drugged his wife and offered her to tens of men, and she suffered repeated rape. 51 people who are bus drivers, local councillors, etc. This trial is trivializing evil. These people are family fathers. They are Mr. Anybody. Today, Giselle Pellico is become part of history. So that shame changes camp. In this process, in this trial, we see rape by curiosity and rape by courtesy, and some say it wasn't actually rape. Consent should be clear and unambiguous, and otherwise it's no. Half of Europeans suffer domestic violence. 1 in 5 in France. People think that women can be forced. A far-right government has forced women to wait for the birth of a baby in her womb. I'm thinking of Julia Cecchettin, who was found dead, assassinated by her former partner. This is a barbarous femicide, as happens throughout Europe. I'm thinking of our mothers, our grandmothers, our sisters, our daughters, those who have not complained, those who haven't been had justice done, and I think of them all. The definition of rape in Europe should include consent. That should be part of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. Each generation, one after each other, should be informed about consent. It's a fight of society, not of genders. So let's become mobilized so that we stop this type of violence and this horror.
Prosím pani kolegyňu Kamara za skupinu Zelených Európska slobodná aliancia. Nech sa páči.
Chers collègues,
Colleagues, patriarchy no longer exists. I'm quoting the Italian Minister of Education when paying tribute to Giulia Cecchettin, who was victim of femicide in 2023. This is all part of his xenophobic agenda, of course, that of the extreme right. They claim that the EU no longer has a patriarchal structures in place. This puts women in danger. The figures speak for themselves. 1 in 3 women in Europe has suffered or will suffer physical, sexual violence, verbal violence or threats, even including rape. 1 in 5 have been victim of physical violence or sexual violence on the part of an intimate partner, a member of their family, or another close person. So masculine violence is systemic, is present, omnipresent, and is prevalent in all social strata, everywhere. Women should be free of physical danger and discrimination. We have to move from a culture of rape to a culture of consent. We have to put an end to impunity, finally. Finally, shame should change sides here.
Merci. A teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Aubry.
Thank you, and colleague Aubrey, the left. The floor is yours.
Quelle femme peut dire...
Which woman can say that they haven't been the victim of sexist and sexual violence at some point? Chauvinist remark, harassment on the street, even a slap, humiliation to femicide. This is on the continuum of violence in patriarchal society. All women are victims of this. They come up, of course, with ways to adapt. How can we live in a society where we compare our social interaction, alcohol consumption with the risk of aggression? But our bodies aren't for anyone to touch. We feel rage, we feel anger. Women have had enough. They don't want to be the victims of violence on our streets or in our homes, in intimate family surroundings. No, they're all men. Not all men, but they are all men. They are in the gym, in our group of friends, on TV, in our families, and sometimes even in our political parties. And some defend themselves by saying, she didn't say no. Rape is the only crime where the perpetrator feels innocent and it is the victim who feels guilty. Look at the Gisèle Pellicot case in Mazan. There are those who, despite raping the drugged body of Gisèle Pellicot, said that they did not commit rape. We're talking about a mindset and culture of rape. There isn't an equality minister in France, and yet we could start off with something straightforward. In the Mazan Gisèle Pellicot trial, we have to think about the whole issue of consent. Consent has to be put in French legislation and EU legislation. We can do something straightforward. We have to have consent-based rape legislation. We would have adopted this if Macron hadn't sided with Orban in order to throw a spanner in the works. And so many perpetrators are never brought to justice. We have to look at sex education, which the far right hates. We have to do something so that the shame changes camp. Thank you.
Thank you. And colleague Bostor for the European of Sovereign Nations.
Sehr geehrte Damen.
Ladies and gentlemen, today is one of these UN days, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. These days are suited so that once a year we can be honest, so that once in a year we can address things which in Europe we don't want to experience. Today's day would be suited to see the true causes and the terrible consequences of violence against women. And then the logical consequence of this would be to say clearly why violence against women in recent years hasn't gone down, but rather increased. In Germany, last year, 360 women were victim of femicide. They were killed because they were women. And we have about 600 attempted murders. Every day, the statistics in Germany says that there are 25 sexual crimes committed by refugees. That's an increase about 27% compared to the previous year. So it's no wonder that over half of women in Germany say that in an evening they don't want to be alone in the street. But it's not just public, it's also domestic violence that is exploding. There were 180 cases in Germany, and it's going up. And a third of cases of domestic violence are not German. And Germany is full. We have 13,000 places missing, and most of the women in women's homes have a foreign background. And we have a demonstration against violence against women, and we have a transsexual demonstration in Düsseldorf, and for those who want to be a women who are not. Let's name the true causes and the real perpetrators and call for millions of people to re-migrate. Well, let's call for re-migration.
Thank you very much. And colleague Zhovko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, poštovani predsjedniče.
Mr. Chairman, every 10 minutes in 2023, a woman was killed. Those women were mothers, sisters, friends. Behind every number is a destroyed family and destroyed future. The European Union should act more decisively, more quickly. We need a united strategy which will enable women to live free from fear and violence. I welcome the decision of Prime Minister Plenković to put an end to this violence, to combat violence in domestic violence by stricter laws. Femicide as a criminal, declaring femicide as a criminal act is a step forward, but we shouldn't stop there. It is our obligation to protect women and girls everywhere, beyond the borders of the European Union. We must show our determination to protect fundamental rights of all women and girls. There should be no hesitation or discussion about it. This is a political decision. Shall we allow murderers to continue their work, to engage in this regional pastime? It is time to stop it and to do what has been done in Croatia, criminalize rape and violence against women.
And now, colleague.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Sexual violence committed by men is fed by those who brush this under the carpet or just make a joke of it. You're also complicit if you don't adopt laws or budgets to combat this phenomenon. People who treat it as something natural, people who like and share abuse against women on the internet, on dehumanizing speech. And of course, this is not just in the digital environment, because 8 out of 10 women between the ages of 16 and 30 are avoiding public spaces in order to avoid risks of sexual harassment or violence. Gender-based violence against women and girls knows no frontiers. We were just talking about the Giselle Pellicot case. Yesterday, a woman in my country near Sevilla in Andalusia was killed by her partner. This is why in the European Parliament we are calling for the full implementation of the Gender-Based Violence Directive in all countries, and we call on the Commission to come forward with a proposal to identify gender-based violence as a new Euro crime, so that we can continue to fight to ensure that rape is criminalised at European level on the basis of absence of consent. Today, the 25th of November, and every day, we have to stand up against this scourge. And we have to resist the right-wing backlash, the anti-women backlash in this House and in Europe as a whole.
Thank you. And now, colleague Andrea.
Since you refuse to admit the improvement in women's lives of throwing criminals out, let me say the following. We have this patriarchy, but we're saying that all men are predators. Now, Gisèle Pelicot has become a symbol, and the shock shows that rape in the home goes against our morals. We have a real culture of rape. Can you imagine what would happen in Iran or Pakistan? But does this exempt our society? No, because this case mirrors two failures. That is all about pleasure, without limit, without thinking of the others. It's about instant pleasure. We've got pornography everywhere, which is about bodily torture, and it's on the screens of men who are becoming younger and younger and who are only learning from this. We also haven't been able to get rid of the fact that kids that have been the victims of violence then sometimes perpetrated later. We don't need to come up with a war of the sexes because we're already very violent. We need empathy and we need humanism. You might not like this, but this is a truly Western value.
Thank you. And now colleague Wiśniewska.
Panie Przewodniczący, Pani Komisarz.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Once again, we are celebrating the International Day for the elimination of violence against women. And we're speaking again about this in this hemicycle. We can address in orange and repeat things, but what would it mean? When we look at the numbers, we are moved. But look, what is the participation here? Where are the people? Where are the men? Too many people are quiet. Let's see who are the members of the Women's Rights Committee. How many men sit in this committee? Today, we're looking at the question of education. How can we educate our girls so that they are women? They can't accept being beaten. How can we change attitudes and stereotypes? Violence is an evil. We should do everything we can so that women are safe in their values and dignity. We can't have such situations again, that a woman is knocked over in the street without saying anything. We should protest against violence, put an end to it. We can't accept silence. Recently, a Polish woman and her 2 children were assassinated in Brussels. Nobody's talking about it. We should speak about it. We should cry out loud. We shouldn't authorize silence, indifference. We should put our education program into to work so we have self-defense.
Thank you. And now colleague Al-Sahlani.
Every time we stand here to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women is a proof of our collective failure. Because even when we say that all girls and women deserve a life free from violence, we still do not have, for all women in the EU, access to legal and safe abortion. Still today, we do not have a European common definition of rape. This is here today, but if we look a few centuries ago, men used to burn women who were not comfortable in societies. Today, in Iran, women are declared insane because they fight for their human rights by men. Women are raped as part of wars and armed conflicts everywhere by men. Women are killed in their very own homes by men. Women are educating themselves, working hard, but be outrun in the salaries by men. They say not all men, but all women. It's time for all men to end violence against women.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím.
Thank you. And now, colleague Giza.
Frauen.
2023. 63 žena ubijeno od partnera. I jedna žena ubijena je prevelik broj.
Mehr beschimpft, verleumdet und bedroht. Und die Täter sind Männer. Richtig ist auch, nicht alle Männer sind Täter. Aber wo sind denn diese Männer, wenn es darum geht, die Mittel für Frauenhäuser aufzustocken, damit alle Frauen und Kinder eine sichere Zuflucht finden können? Wo sind sie, wenn es darum geht, digitale Gewalt wirksam zu bekämpfen? Und wo waren die Minister im Rat, als die Frauen aus der Kommission und aus diesem Parlament ein Gesetz geschrieben haben, das Frauen in ganz Europa effektiv geschützt hätte? Sie haben wirksamen Schutz verhindert, die Justizminister im Rat. Liebe Männer, es ist gut, dass die meisten von euch keine Täter sind. Aber die Zeit, in der man am Spielfeldrand stehen konnte, die ist vorbei. Kämpft mit uns, kämpft mit den Frauen, um Gewalt gegen Frauen und Mädchen endlich ein Ende zu setzen.
Ďakujem. Malý moment, máme problém.
Thank you.
Čiže angličtina mala byť späť.
Okay, so English channel should be back in. So now, Madame Jedin, the floor is yours.
2017 markerade en revolution med MeToo.
2017 marked a revolution with Me Too because we broke the silence on sexual predators. But 85,000 women are killed every year, so men give themselves the right to control the lives and bodies of women. We saw what happened in France with Gisèle Pelicot. We have to affirm our rights. The same applies in the United States that are fighting for their right to reproduce. Feminist movements are under threat. Anti-feminist movements are threatening women. We have to look at what is happening in the public space and at the workplace. There are these threats hanging over the heads of women, and this also threatens democracy. We are against this. We stand against this, and we're going to speak out loud and clear. We need to continue this battle. We need political reforms that give women these human rights. We need to do this no matter where we are in the world.
Thank you. Mr. David, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, violence within the society cannot be limited by words and international days. What helps is to cultivate people through education and through the way they are brought up, and punishments for those we fail to. And we cannot totally uproot violence. Violence will grow with growing social isolation of people and their frustrations. If we are interested only in violence against women and not against men, it would help if we stop the influx of uneducated and not well brought up people from abroad to the EU. The same activists who fight against violence against women also promote migration, including migration from primitive areas in certain Muslim countries. It is not difficult to arrive at a conclusion that maybe they are not quite clear in their head.
Thank you. Now, Madame Lashakova, the floor is yours. Colleagues, my apologies. because I've got a toothache, but I consider this topic extremely important. Several names have been mentioned here, and let me add another one. Today, I'll tell you the story of one courageous woman, a policewoman who acted lawfully, and her male colleagues wanted to kick, well, the shit out of her, kick her in her genitals, pour petrol on her car, and put it on fire. When they found out they couldn't break her, they began to persecute her unlawfully. Can you imagine? You sit home, you are sick, and wait for your much respected colleagues to come and kick your door open? You don't know, but thank you for that. When in the story of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore gives the final points, the fewest will go to Neville Longbottom. But they are the most valuable because it is the hardest things to stand up and say to our colleagues that they are wrong. And therefore, please remember the name of Diana Santos, who was courageous when courage was so dear, who and her team acted legally despite the fact that her colleague, male colleague, wanted to eliminate her physically. Thank you for the floor. Thank you. And now, colleague Nicol, the floor is yours.
Dziękuję bardzo. Międzynarodowy Dzień Walki.
Thank you very much. The International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women should make us reflect. This is a problem which is present everywhere because it affects women in every area. Statistics for the Gender Equality Institute shows that a third of women in the EU have suffered some sort of violence. In France, every third day a woman dies from at the hands of a current or ex-partner. 87% of Polish women have been victims of some form of sexual violence. And many victims fear to go to the police for various reasons. So the true statistics are probably even higher. 260 billion a year. That's the cost of all this violence. In my country, there's a law against violence in the home. We have various procedures, but the access to a home, to psychological assistance isn't enough. Colleagues, our responsibility isn't just to cite the statistics. We should act. We should put in place various campaigns, information campaigns and actions. In my country, in my town, there are various actions being organized. There are marches in the streets. There are various demonstrations and meetings. As a grandmother, I encourage you not to be in...
Thank you. Now, Mr. Nemec, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world where women mold our society, but they die in their own homes. 140 women die every day. Every 10 minutes there's a femicide, and the statistics are alarming. And the situation is out of control in our societies. Gender-based violence flouts fundamental rights. We have to redefine gender-based violence on the basis of the model only yes means yes, and we need this in the whole of the EU. Gender-based violence has to be defined as an offense in the EU on the basis of Article 83 TFEU. 5 member states still haven't ratified the Istanbul Convention. They have to do it. We have to create a society without violence, as Kofi Annan said, and violence against women is the most shameful and disgraceful violence, but it doesn't know any cultural, religious, and social borders. And if we don't do this, there cannot be gender equality and peace.
Madam Ferenc, the floor is yours.
President, dear colleagues, this is the day of the elimination of violence against women. 1 woman out of 3 globally have experienced violence at least once in her life. It's very important to have this topic on the agenda and give voice to women who are taking their voices away. Many times violence takes place in women's own homes. And sometimes we forget to mention that women are at risk in public places. I often travel inside and outside of Europe. I'm also afraid to go to the streets after dark. I experienced the fear when I'm trying to reach for my mobile phone, or I'm afraid of some steps coming too close. I'm a lucky woman because Hungary is one of the 20 safest countries globally. This is thanks to conscious steps taken by the Hungarian government with conscious migration policy and targeted developments. This can be an example for other countries as well to improve the feelings of safety and security for women. This is the right of every woman at home, at the workplace, and on the internet.
Thank you. Madam Kanko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Commissioner. How many women and girls still undergo female genital mutilation today? How many are treated as second-rank citizens? How many are economically deprived? How many are sexually assaulted without ever seeing justice happen? Too many. It's time that the macho, patriarchal society that trivializes rape changes. Gisèle Pellicot said that. Her case in France has rightly sparked deep outrage and horror. Her husband has been sentenced to 20 years in prison for years of drugging and raping her. As if that were not already unimaginable enough, during that time, he also invited more than 70 other men to rape her too. How can someone who committed such atrocities for years ever walk free again? This man, and everyone who knew, did not only destroy Gisèle Pellicot's life, but also showed how deep evil can go and silence can hurt. This is organized, repeated, and cruel abuse of trust, love, and humanity. Women must be protected from such monsters. After all, what is the rule of law worth if justice cannot guarantee our safety? As Gisèle Pellicot said, it's time that the macho patriarchal society that trivializes rape changes. The new Commission must deliver on this topic. We must ensure that women can walk freely on the streets and not be afraid after dark, that they are safe at home and not economically oppressed, that young girls never learn that their dignity is an option. Boys and girls are equal and violence must always be punished. No religion is above the law. Investing in the safety of all women and girls is investing in our future as a society. Our legal system must also not discriminate, regardless of color, religion, or social position of women. The only answer to injustice must be justice.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím kolegu.
Thank you. Mr. Žalimas, the floor is yours.
Mr. Speaker, dear colleagues, today we confront an uncomfortable truth. Gender-based violence against women poisons Europe's fight for democracy and human rights. Nowhere is this more evident than in the brutal Russia's war against Ukraine, where violence, including sexual violence, is being used systematically as a weapon of war. The crimes of aggression and gender-based violence are not isolated. They are deeply rooted in the destructive ideology of the Russian world, which inter alia promotes discrimination against women. Regretfully, even in the EU, similarities to and traces of this ideology exist, undermining women's rights. We have powerful instruments to combat this, such as the Istanbul Convention. Yet it is shameful that this treaty is still not binding on all EU countries, including my own country, Lithuania. Political resistance fueled by disinformation cannot justify our failure to act. We must ensure that every EU member state commits to the Istanbul Convention, building a united Europe where women are safe, equal and free. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne. A teraz
Thank you. And now the floor goes to Madam Redefining. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioner. The 25th of November is a day where we should speak out on behalf of all of those who are not able to do so. And let's not delude ourselves. Sexist violence, gender-based violence is not something that should be filed away in a sub-drawer, in some kind of underground car park or some badly lit area. It can happen in a playground, in open spaces, in our homes. Perpetrators don't have to be unknown people. It could be our boss, it can be our classmate, it can be our partner. And if that weren't bad enough, after the sexual aggression, we have to reconstruct our lives, which have been destroyed and are marked by this aggression. And we are asked questions about what we were wearing on that day. What were we doing there? What did we do to provoke this attack? Enough is enough. And as we heard in the Dominique Pellico case, shame should change sides now. The shame should be on the perpetrators. What gave them the right to think that they could do that? What gave them the right to act with such impunity? Where are the laws that should be protecting us women? We don't want to listen to any more empty words or just hold moments of silence. We want laws that are applied, politicians that protect us, and a society that does not tolerate a single act of violence.
Thank you. The floor goes to Madame Kontura.
Thank you very much, President. Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and the message today should be loud and clear. Zero tolerance to violence against women. According to the United Nations official statistics, the situation is shocking. In 2023, one woman was killed every 10 minutes, killed either by her partner or a member of her family. In Greece, over the last 5 years, 106 women were killed. The European Parliament, we here have to make sure that the victims are protected, that they can access justice, that they can access health care and specialized support. We need to prevent, we need to raise awareness, we have to make sure we get rid of gender stereotypes, and we have to increase funding for medical, psychological counseling for the victims of gender-based violence. There have to be awareness-raising campaigns. We have to invest on all levels so that we can invest in the new generation, so they can understand that respect is vital, and they need to understand that there should be zero tolerance to violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gražulis. The floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, I'm listening to this discussion, and I get the impression that only men are the perpetrators of violence. But I say, in totality, the violence should be prohibited. Violence against children, violence against disabled, violence against men. We should say no to all types of violence. Even violence against animals should be stopped. And it's very strange to me that, for example, the case in France, the boxing match where a man beat a woman, that was very strange. Women cannot equal men with their strength. So I would urge you not to classify into different groups: men, women, children, disabled, and so on. No to violence, and we should achieve this goal through education.
Blue card for you from Mrs. Al-Salani. Do you accept it?
Okay.
There is on the side, there is a...
Choose your language.
I don't know if he understood.
Okay.
There is a blue card for you. There is a blue card for you from Mrs. Al-Salani. The question is if you accept it. No? There is a blue card for you from Mrs. Al-Salani. Do you accept it? Yes? Okay. Thank you.
Yes. For this speech that did not say anything about ending the violence against women, I just wanted you to clarify here. Did you just compare the animal welfare with the gender-based violence? Is that your purpose?
I was saying that in total, violence should be stopped. Violence is evil. We have to fight with it, against it. And according to your question, and according to today's discussion, I get the impression that only men are the perpetrators of violence and that the men are the ultimate evil. That is not so. The evil is the violence in its all forms.
Just a small request on this debate. It's quite hard for me, honestly, to try to be knocking you in terms of the time. So my personal request, please try to stick to your time as much as possible. Thank you. Let's say sometime.
I speak this evening with mixed emotions as we address the issue that has impacted generations of women across the EU for far too long, and that is violence against women. Like some of you in this debate, every time I speak on this growing issue, the weight of inaction grows heavier. Yet I'm also immensely proud of the Parliament's landmark legislative achievement passed in this last mandate, which is a bedrock of women's safety. As former Irish MEP Frances Fitzgerald outlined, the gender-based violence legislation represents a historic milestone in our EU's for women's right. While this legislation is progressing, violence against women has not stopped, and I think of the harrowing stories of Giselle Pericot in France or Nikita Hand in Ireland, and we must remember that neither person should have had to endure such horror. I think too of the strength of women in Poland fighting daily for their fundamental rights to autonomy to their own bodies, and the women in the United States who watch in disbelief as individuals and public representatives show blatant disregard for their rights and dignity. Here in this House, we strive to ensure that women's rights are upheld with unwavering conviction. But let's be honest with ourselves. Our responsibility doesn't end with legislation. Violence against women doesn't appear out of nowhere. It arises from deeply rooted sexism that pervades our culture, institutions and attitudes, and it simply must end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ako ďalší poprosím.
The next speaker is Madam Fritzton. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. 1 woman in 3 in the world is subject to sexual and physical violence throughout their life. That's nothing new, but we're not doing enough to put an end to that. Orange Day, this is a day, means that we can draw attention to the pandemic of violence. This is historical progress. This is something against violence against women. Ms. Inser was responsible for the negotiating this text. It's important. It's not enough to fight against this type of violence. We need an agreement in Europe saying that sex should be voluntary. We see that girls and women are exposed to violence during war, with rape, but also sexual aggression. That has become a weapon of war. In the Social Democrats, we'd like to add that there's also violence by women against women, by men against women, which is a crime. We'd like to fight this fight, be in the lead to make sure that Europe is a safe place for women and girls, all of them. There's a principle that we should start the combat with far-right countries who are on the front line when it comes to women's rights. We should look at our girls in their eyes, and we are responsible for your security. Thank you very much.
Mr. Patriarchy.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, heute am
Ladies and gentlemen, on the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women, we have to face an uncomfortable but important truth. Violence against women is not an abstract statistic, it's a daily reality that deeply affects our societies. In recent years, we've seen a worrying trend. The number of sexual assaults or violent assaults against women has increased, not least due to the challenge of migration and the changes in cultural dynamics. It is important that we face up to this reality and discuss this. Yes, we do have to discuss the darker sides of migration. Differing cultural backgrounds need to be lucidly addressed. Integration doesn't just mean living in another country, but also respecting the values of that country. And when you cross borders, you bring your cultural baggage with you. We're also concerned about the rise in violence amongst young people. We need to invest in education. Schools and families play a very important role in this. The European Union needs to address this issue and all its ramifications. We need better protection for victims. We need proper prosecutions, and we need better educational programs. This is not a marginal phenomenon. This is something, this kind of violence goes against all our humanist values. So let's work together to address this.
Stollenberg, akzeptieren Sie die?
Yes, I hope.
Do you accept the blue card?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
If it's in English, I don't know.
I will do it in English, no worries. I heard several times our colleagues here addressing that migrants are the problem of violence against women. Although we know so often, all the research shows that violence is often caused by the people close to us. And the European Institute for Gender Equality show that 70 to 80% of all the violence against women is caused by someone close to us. And also the case in France, the Pellico case, shows this again. So how do you explain your logic in this?
Lesen Sie gerne auch die Statistiken.
Well, read the statistics. I can tell you what we found out from our regional parliaments. In our public criminal statistics, we do have evidence for what I said.
Thank you very much. And now, colleague Maréchal.
Mes chers collègues, j'aimerais vous parler. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to talk to you about a country with 125,000 women who have been the victims of FGM and 180,000 living in polygamy. In one decade in this country, the number of Muslim women wearing a veil have gone up by 50%, while Iranian women are fighting hard to get rid of the headscarves. There are women who don't want to wear a veil or don't want to respect Ramadan and are hit for that. And then, of course, there are honor killings and are made to shave their hair if they've hung out with a boy. This isn't Afghanistan. This isn't Sudan. This country is European. It's my country. It's France. In France, 77% of street rapes in Paris were carried out by foreigners. In the European Parliament, on the day, International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, let us think about the safety of European women and security of European women that are the main victims of Islamization and the fact that foreign cultures are imported onto our soil.
From Madame Aubry. Yeah.
Mrs. Maréchal, you're strangely interested in women's rights, but only when the perpetrators are Muslim or foreign. But you know that there's no religion and no nationality when it comes to rape. Gérard Depardieu, Polanski, I could go on and on with the list. These are French men like you and me. and you know that the figure they're giving is fake news. 90% of perpetrators of sexual violence come from our entourage, but you don't want to recognize that because you have this racist mentality. So recognize what I'm saying.
J'imagine que vous vous félicitez.
Mrs. Aubry, it seems that maybe you're pleased with these Muslim practices imported because you have voters, but you know that these are official figures, and you know that foreign criminals account for a huge share of crimes in our country, including sexual offenses. Let me say that societies throughout history have often had problems, but that's not a reason to import extra predators. We already have ours, and these extra predators then claim victims who are women, our mothers.
The next one is Kollega Kelleher.
500 women are killed each year by their partners, and 1 in 3 women suffer physical or sexual violence during their lifetime. Our mothers, sisters and daughters. We want laws that protect our women and girls, and we want laws that punish perpetrators, and it should start in here. Of course, we have wild hyena cheers from the right from time to time, advocating for political leaders across the world that are the very leaders that try to crush the individual rights of women and young girls, objectify them and sexualise them beyond belief. It is shameful at times when we listen to debates that we don't have an honest assessment of what is happening across the globe. And certain leaders in political times do objectify, do undermine the basic rights of women, and that is shameful. And it is happening in Europe, and it is happening by political parties over there who are applauding on a daily basis their leaders who are undermining the basic rights of women and girls in our society and in the European Union. It's shameful.
Thank you very much. And now, colleagues, Strollenberg.
90% of the deepfake videos nowadays are pornographic videos, and 99% target women. Online gender-based violence is rapidly expanding. So if we talk about gender-based violence, we sadly must talk about online gender-based violence as well. But there are things we can do to change this. First of all, we must hold tech companies and social media platforms accountable. We need stronger content moderation. We need to make sure that when complaints are filed, we need transparency how they are treated. And we need to rebalance the freedom of speech and avoiding harm. And I feel strongly about this because I don't want Musk to decide what is appropriate behavior and what is not. But legislation alone is not enough. Online violence reflects deeper societal misogyny, sexism. Without tackling these problems, we will only apply temporary fixes for a systemic problem. Lastly, I want to address the men in the room. I have 3 colleagues that I want to thank because they stood up for the women. But in general, we miss your voices. You need to stand with us to fight this fight because it is a problem for all of us.
Thank you very much. And now, colleague Morace, the floor is yours.
President, approximately 50 million European women, 1 in 3, has been the victim of physical, sexual, or psychological violence. These dramatic figures show that we have to react strongly, and we need to do it together. Those who deny this emergency, who are underestimating the facts, I'd like to remind you of what happened to Giulio Cecchettin and Tramontano, 2 women killed by European white men. Not only do we need harsher legislation, but we have to invest in prevention and the culture of respect. We must fight against the patriarchal society, and we have to set the right example, because we have no excuse. Let us react, because reacting is a duty. It's not optional. But to the colleague before, let me say that 85% of violence against men is actually perpetrated by men.
Thank you. And now, colleague Esteras Ferragut.
Thank you, President. Every 10 minutes, a woman is murdered. The figures are devastating. And in my country, less than 48 hours ago, a husband killed his wife in the province of Seville, leaving 2 orphans, 17 and 11 years old. And yet this is just one other in a whole series of such cases in Spain over the last 15 years. Today is a day for all of us to think of the victims. Every death could have been avoided and should have been avoided. These situations have to be detected, and proper support is fundamental. We need to stand united to put an end to this atrocity against human rights. We need for this social and political commitment. We shouldn't drag our feet and use double standards in political debates when it talks about addressing these problems. We could do without hypocrisy. We have to stand up for our European values, and we're not doing that if we prevent rape without consent from being a crime, as we saw on the part of some European leaders who blocked this. I'm very proud that all of my party supported the idea that rape based on absence of consent should be made.
Thank
Bitte sehr.
Sehr geehrte Frau Kommissarin.
Madam Commissioner, on the 25th of November, on the day for the elimination of violence against women, I'd like to address men, the real men. The genuine men are those who never hit. The genuine men who want to have equality with women, who do work in the home. The genuine men are happy about women succeeding in their careers. They protect women. They don't hide against tradition or religion. The genuine men are Democrats. But we have those men who are cowards, who are weak, and who aren't men. Those men who are perpetrators, they have afraid of women. They're afraid of talking. They're afraid about the sexual appetite of women. And those who hide behind religion and tradition, who have a wrong definition of masculinity, and they are not democratic in many cases, and they also have fascist ideas. It means we European women, we know which men we can count on. These are Democrats, and we European women know which men we cannot count on.
Thank you very much. And now, colleague Cruz.
Yeah, thank you very much, President. I'm smiling a bit about what all of these left-wing women have said who've taken the floor. They're all privileged girls from international schools who've grown up in a left-wing bubble and never really faced a genuine challenge in their lives. With their collectivism and moral superiority, they are fighting against everything male or masculine. And of course, if you're used to privilege, then equal treatment seems like oppression to you. But their woke agenda is coming up against reality. All this gender business doesn't actually solve any problems in the world. Instead of standing up against violence, in fact, they themselves are a punch in the face of many women who have to deal with violence. They associate with Islam. And of course, that is the #1 cause of violence against women in the world, and unfortunately a cause of death very often. The fact that I, as a man, have to mansplain this to a set of princesses is a scandal. Today, on the International Day of Violence Against Women, is a moment where we should bear in mind that we have massively imported hatred against women. Our cities have become dangerous places for women. Therefore, we have to fight against normalization, and if you're for women, you should be against Islam.
Excuse me, sir? There is a blue card from Mrs. Walsh. Do you accept it? Do you accept the blue card from Madam Walsh? Wait. No? Can you understand me now? Do you accept blue card from Mrs. Walsh? Blue card. She's a question. Over there.
Good evening, colleague. I wouldn't be waving. How dare you? How dare you insult the women that represent thousands of women, our allies, who represent thousands of women across the EU. And actually, as you were speaking, colleague, can you really stand over the fact in your country of Netherlands, I believe, 33% of women in a relationship have experienced violence by an intimate partner. In total, 17% have experienced physical violence and 32% have experienced psychological violence. Can you actually stand over what you just said about us women and your own people who sadly elected you to this parliament that believes in democracy and equality? Shame on you, sir. Shame on you.
Nou, het is niet zo dat als je zo'n toon tegen me aanslaat... Dat...
Well, just because you take that tone with me doesn't mean that you're right. Look at what's happening in our big cities, in our Western democracies. Look at what is happening to women. Well, you've got all these women all veiled, walking beside their husbands, and you're standing up for women. Well, you should be standing up for women who are oppressed by Islam, and take that tone with me on such a day, which is a day of violence against women, against violence against women. That's not on either.
Thank you very much. And now, colleague Gemma.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. To all the women who are victims of violence, I say to you, stop being silent, stop, say stop to isolation, say stop to the silence after a slap, to silence after provocation, say stop, enough. Silence of courage. You have to all be free in harmony with your dignity, and you have to be bold in the face of this intolerable barbarism. We have to go for prevention, but we also need focus on a culture and education. And it's not about possession and jealousy and that link men to women. Let us educate our daughters and make them understand what a respectful relationship is all about. There's so many different forms of slavery, of objectification, and we have to fight against this type of degradation that reduces women to just being an object. Violence is a choice. Let us stop remaining silent and let us make noise together.
Prosím, kolegyňu Jar.
And now colleague Jar. Bruises hidden under clothes, a forced yes after decisive no, unwanted touching, unsolicited messages, psychological violence. For millions of women and girls, this is a daily reality. And for more than 85,000, it was also the last chapter of their lives last year. Yet some countries, including my own Slovakia, are still not addressing gender-based violence as urgently as the gravity of the situation demands. Violence is normalized even in the vocabulary and actions of politicians and public figures in such a way that those who should protect us will send a psychologically abused woman home to her abuser, saying that unless she has a knife in her belly or at least a bruise, nothing can be done. I have heard several stories on this issue when visiting centers of battered women in the east of Slovakia. We learn to heal the wounds on the body and on the soul, but we don't manage to effectively prevent the violence causing it. A life free from violence and fear should be European and Slovak standard. Violence in any form is neither acceptable nor justifiable. It has never been so. It never will be so. We should not tolerate it anymore. Thank you very much. And now, colleague Cunha.
Sr. Presidente, colegas.
President, colleagues. 150, that's the number of women who lose their life every day because they are murdered by their partners or relatives. Every 10 minutes there's such a murder. In the EU, 1 woman in 3 has said that they have been a victim of sexual or mental violence once in their life at least, and violence against women. It's not just about physical violence, but it's also digital. This digital space has become a scene for sexual violence. There's online groups where everything is allowed. We can see that in the Telegram case in Portugal, where 30,000 men had access to intimate content without the consent of the victim, or the sexual attacks, femicide. That's a shadow on the life of many women and girls. It's necessary that we look at the mechanisms and strengthen them and protect victims. We need access to justice for these victims. We need a public policy of prevention against this violence, and which fights it. Violence against women isn't just a crime. It's a fundamental infringement of human rights and basic rights. In Europe, there can't be a space for violence, and we won't accept that. This space shouldn't exist.
Thank you. Madame Moretti, the floor is yours.
Non è colpa tua.
It's not your fault. It's not your wife's fault. It's not because of that glass you had. And then you said yes, but then you changed your mind. It's always the fault of the perpetrator, and the reporting violence shouldn't be seen as shameful. 1 in 3 women have been the victims of violence, and not just physical violence. There have been 100 femicides in Italy so far this year, but it's also psychological violence, lack of economic independence, and these type forms of violence are increasing. We even have violence in the home. We need a cultural revolution in order to throw off the yoke of the patriarchal society. We need everyone in schools to help. We need boys to understand they have to accept and know, because violence is always that against consent. Violence against women is a man's problem. They have to become protagonists in this battle, because a society free of violence and fear is a better society for everyone.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím kolegyňu.
Thank you. And now the floor goes to colleague Sorel.
Chers collègues,
these international the veils in Iran and Afghanistan. I'd like to salute the work of Simone de Beauvoir, and we have that's in France too, in Europe. And one woman is the subject of rape or attempted rape every 7 minutes. The Me Too movement is a turning point for our society. But about everywhere in Europe, there's an increase in violence against women. We need to have the courage to breach and break through several taboos. First of all, mothers have a key role to play. It's us who have sons. There are ancient works which are against by FGM practices, but these dramas take place in Europe. Secondly, the over-representation of immigration in France. I've worked for the state authorities, and we have all the figures. Let's have a thought for the victims in Cologne in 2016, and a girl who was burnt alive at the age of 18 in an immigration area. We need to give much more support to support associations. If we persist in looking at the consequences without worrying about the root causes, violence will continue to increase. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the floor goes to colleague Magone.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The violence against women is a tragic reality that knows no borders. It's in our homes, streets, workplaces. It's a social and cultural scourge. We mustn't look the other way. We cannot remain silent. We have to think, we have to act, and do everything we can to make sure that women are respected and that we fight against violence and that this becomes a guiding principle for our society. Behind each figure, behind each case, is a person, a mother, a sister, a daughter with dreams that were rudely interrupted, violently interrupted by violent people. We have to pray for the victims of femicide without forgetting the women that are silently the victims of FGM and psychological violence. At the same time, we have to look at reality in the face. And as Mrs. Meloni, our Prime Minister, said, sexual violence happens more, or is perpetrated more by immigrants that have entered Italy in a legal matter. We need harsh sentences. Without this, we cannot build a society where women can live in an atmosphere of respect and security.
Thank you. And the floor goes to colleague Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, making mistakes is bad. Being right is good. But today in this room, I'm very sorry that we were right. It would be better if we were wrong. It would be better if Parliament, demanding the criminalization of rape, the consent-based definition of rape, was wrong. It would be better if all these stupid arguments of the majority, of blocking majority of the Council, that our women are already protected, turned out to be true. But today's protests in France, the Gisèle Pelicot's case, speak louder than any words, and this time we are obliged to hear them. We like to argue that Europe has to set an example on this and that, but how, for God's sake, can we set any example for someone else in the world if we are not able even adopt legislation to protect our own citizens in our own territory? It is shameful that national selfishness, arguments about EU interference in the legal system of member states, and other nonsense have taken us so far. The women of Europe pay for this irresponsible rhetoric's really high price. And this is our duty and the duty of the new Commission and the Council to finally make Europe a safe home for every woman and girl. Thank you.
Ďakujem. A teraz ho prosím kolegy.
Thank you. And now colleague Princi.
Una donna su tre. 1 out of 3 women in Europe is the victim of violence at some point in their lives. In Italy, from the beginning of the year, 100 women have been murdered. And this is unacceptable. Online violence is an increasing scourge. We don't know how big a scourge yet, because even now there is no harmonized definition of cyber violence. The time has come to plug the gap. The EPP clamors for legislation that will look at the issue of online violence, that will improve the directive on against violence against women and domestic violence, that also looks at sexual abuse and non-consensual pornography. Let us look towards the future with an action plan on artificial intelligence. AI can and must identify signs of domestic violence through data collected through security apps, and that will help us come up with immediate prevention. We need to develop this and regulate it as well to protect women. To all the victims of violence, we say to you, you are not alone. We all stand by your side. It doesn't matter what political party we come from, because the only color that counts today is the color of the orange flag that is symbolically billowing in the wind in Strasbourg. It is our duty to be the scream of those who have had to remain quiet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to announce that I closed the Catch the Eye list and will be probably able to accommodate approximately 8 colleagues. And the next one, colleague Ashley Guy. Please.
Hvala, predsjedavajući.
Thank you, Chair. In Europe, 2,300 women are killed in Europe by a partner every year. Every third woman has experienced some form of sexual or physical violence. This is today the reality in Europe. Dark and terrible reality, which should be prevented by better prevention and more drastic penalties. The Istanbul Convention, unfortunately, hasn't come to life in Europe in the way we had hoped. Why? Because some member states, instead of focusing on combating violence, are focusing on invented enemies hidden in the so-called gender ideology. To correct the failure of the implementation of the Istanbul Convention, the European Union has adopted a new directive against sexual violence. That text was also absurdly criticized. Sexual violence in Europe is growing. Statistics tell us that in Europe we have over 230,000 cases every year. We should prevent that. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, colleague Sardona.
Every day, the headlines talk about harrowing stories, but there's even something more painful. When the victims are Muslim girls that have been hit or even killed, then there is shameful silence. So my question is, why are you looking the other way? Why are you closing your eyes to this? We're talking about women's lives who are shattered, and these lives are shattered because they want to live freely, or because they want to put makeup, or love the person they want, or not wear a headscarf. This is intolerable. These women are shouting for freedom, but all they get is indifference. And what is the left saying? What are the feminists saying? And what are the institutions saying? Complete silence, censorship. And I say, shame on you. Stop hiding these because your story on positive integration is not going to work. You can't stop talking about the patriarchal Muslim society because of this. You're doing this for electoral reasons. It's all about votes. This is indecent. It's unacceptable. What kind of Europe do we want to build? I don't want a Europe where women are submissive, where we have Sharia law. I want a free Europe where women can free without being oppressed, without being reduced to being an object. End the silence. Enough. Raise your voices and fight for their freedom.
Madam Sarana, will you accept the blue card from Mr. Saramo? So do you accept the blue card from Mr. Yeah. I need to hear this. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been quite shocked what you said and what the previous your group colleagues were speaking. Today we are here speaking about violence against women. All kinds of violence against women in all kinds of groups. But from your group there was even more hatred against all the women before. And now you are talking, it's like thing that it's happening for the immigrants. And I want to know what you are doing to help these people you were talking and all the other women who are suffering from the violence, because you are only using this to build more hate.
La ringrazio per la domanda. Thank you very much for your question. Look, what am I doing? I'm probably not doing enough. But at the moment, not doing enough is to risk my life. I live under escort because I dared say in plenary that the Islamic veil is not a symbol of freedom but submission. But I'm not scared. And that's because I believe in this battle. So I'm going to continue saying what I think. And I know that this annoys you because you're losing votes.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím kolegu Pika.
Thank you. Mr. Picaro, the floor is yours.
La violenza contro le donne.
Violence against women is one of the most disgraceful violations of human rights. Kofi Annan uttered these words, and I would like to mention this here in the European Parliament, because today we have to talk about a plague that affects our society. It knows no borders, no classes, no ethnic group or age. It is a deep wound that affects victims, but society as a whole. Millions of women in Europe and the world are physically abused and psychologically abused, and often fear and silence just feed into the cycle of violence. That is why national legislation has to be stronger. We have to protect women. We have to make sure that women, no matter where they live, are protected here in Europe. And this has to be an absolute priority. It shouldn't be just about what we do one day. It has to be a constant battle. We should not just list victims, because our duty is to build a society where violence cannot grow.
Thank you for the floor. And Madam Cifrova Ostrihoňová, the floor is yours. It's not easy for me to talk about women victims of violence. It is even difficult to call them heroes, not because they lack courage, but because they did not choose their fate. But few of us can imagine the dilemmas they must face. There are choices forced upon them. I rarely feel anger, but I do feel it when someone tries to deprive women in difficult situations of the space, when someone play down what happened to them. I consider it our role, politicians, to always speak up in such cases, to constantly educate ourselves. I will not, and we will not, allow women to have to endure outrageous statements in the public spaces from people who have no clue of how to behave, and they miss the opportunity to remain silent. But today, I would like to talk about help and a way out, because there is always a way out. Everybody who needs to hear it today, listen. You are not alone. Confiding helps. You are listened to, and you do matter. Thank you. Thank you. Madam Tomasic, the floor is yours.
Nasilje nad ženskami. Priznam, da je to tema, o kateri nisem razmišljala.
Violence against women, I have to say, this is a topic that I hadn't thought about, because I didn't have to. That shouldn't be the reality of any woman or girl. Of course, a day to address this problem is good. The topic shouldn't be a taboo. But I think it's a shame that we need such a day, because such violence shouldn't take place. But that is the reality. 1 in 3 women has been a victim of violence. Every 10 minutes, a woman is killed by her partner. Most violence happens behind closed doors, and we don't know about it. It's also reality that in some countries we have state violence against women. That is not okay, but not just today. Women everywhere who have gathered the courage, we must protect them and say that violence is not acceptable.
Thank you. Mr. López Aguilar, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Presidente, Comisaria Dalli.
Thank you, Commissioner Dalli, President. Everywhere in Europe, sex discrimination is prohibited, just as it's prohibited by the Charter of European Rights. But you don't need to be a legal expert to know that what we are prohibiting is discrimination against women and the criminal forms of discrimination, which are the most appalling, atrocious forms of sexual assault and rape and femicide. Every 10 minutes, a woman loses her life due to at the hands of a partner or family member. The Parliament has the power in its hands to finally adopt a directive against gender-based violence. Some member states are pioneering in this area, and others are really lagging behind in their commitment to fight this systemic violence that affects all of our societies in Europe. But of course, this commitment will not be complete until we criminalise the crime of rape and sexual assault across Europe on the basis of consent. And this is a question of human rights. Thank you.
And now, Madame Frigo, the floor is yours.
Chers collègues,
Ladies and gentlemen, a few days ago in Châlons-Champagne in France, a woman lost an eye and a finger because of an attack. Now, this isn't just somewhere in the back of the newspaper. This is happening more and more in European countries. And there's so many of you here who are turning a blind eye to the growing insecurity in our cities. You're not looking at these women who don't want to go out in the evening on their own. All these young women who wear long underwear under their skirts so that they're not harassed on public transport. You're closing your eyes to this freedom that is being flouted, to these shattered lives. The time has come for the EU to think about these women whose lives have changed overnight because a repeat offender crossed their path when this individual should have been in prison or not even on European soil. This injustice is no longer bearable. So act, otherwise you'll be an accomplice.
Thank you. Now the floor goes to Mr. Barna.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will speak in Romanian. Importanța acestei dezbateri.
Today's debate is so important that it's hard for me to find the appropriate words. We have statistics on Romania and violence against women, and I chose one which is particularly painful. This year, between the 1st and the 15th of July, so in 2 weeks only, 6,843 women called the hotline for victims of domestic violence, and only 57 agreed to complain to the police after that. There is a stigma associated with violence against women, and this is the biggest obstacle we need to overcome. Whether it's sexual, domestic, or verbal violence, this phenomenon must disappear from our society. I wish to express my respect and admiration for the USR candidate in the Romanian presidential elections, Elena Lasconi. She is runner-up. She will be in the second round of the elections, but the campaign she faced was very misogynistic and evil. A woman president could be the signal that something will change in Romania. Thank you.
Mr. Maciulaitis-Walczak.
Szanowni Państwo, koleżanki i koledzy, Międzynarodowy Dzień.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, this International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women marks the date where we should remember, but think about these women, these young girls who experience this discrimination in the street and in sport. There is a grey zone in sport where there is sexual violence. This violence is present in the world of sport. We can't ignore it. Violence against women in sport isn't an isolated case. If we put in place rules in Europe and in nations, we should act to support prevention of violence against women in sport, we should make sure that each athlete, each female athlete, feels protected during competitions or otherwise. We should have protection mechanisms in place and education measures and training measures to lead to that goal. So I call on you. I ask the Commission also to present us with solutions.
Madame Rechagnon.
Le 9 novembre, à Bordeaux.
On the 9th of November in Bordeaux in France, a young woman of the age of 18 was knifed in the back when she was jogging, and the perpetrator was a homeless 23-year-old person from Cameroon who already had a criminal record for having assaulted a woman in 2023. Shortly afterwards, another woman went to the police station and accused the same person of unwanted touching. Going for a run, taking the bus early to go to work, going for a drink with your friends, all these daily things that you ought to be able to do can no longer be enjoyed by young French women who suffer these kinds of assaults. All of this because of the irresponsible policy to open wide the gates of our country. Migrants are overrepresented in these assaults. So how long are we going to leave women exposed to this? It is time to wake up and not allow men in who don't respect the rights and freedoms of women.
A teraz poprosím kolegyňu Ariregoita Martinez.
Gracias. Thank you, President. 25th of November. The far right and those who deny what is happening are on digital platforms, institutions and streets, and they are filling all these fora with unacceptable messages, and they are jeopardizing collective achievements. We just heard how the welfare of women is being compared with animal welfare, with all respect to animal welfare. Let me remind you that this year the European Parliament adopted the first directive that criminalizes FGM, forced marriage and stalking. We've been working for years with society and feminist movements in order to achieve progress when it comes to gender equality and the fight against the violence of women. Now we have to make sure that our sons and daughters don't doubt. Let us make sure we have quality politics, institutional cooperation. We have to be there on digital platforms, emphasizing the importance of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and crossing borders. We have to be a society that doesn't tolerate any form of violence against women. There is no excuse for abuse.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím kolegyňu Dorety. Nech sa páči.
Thanks, Chair. Today we have to confront the harsh truth that violence against women is at global academic levels. It doesn't respect borders, class or race. Every day women are harassed, beaten, assaulted and simply killed because of the fact that they're a woman. And it's not just a woman's issue, it's a human rights crisis at this stage. As a fellow Irish woman, I shouldn't know the names Jessica Bowes, Natasha O'Brien or Nikita Hand, or the countless other brave Irish women who seek justice through our court systems, having faced physical, domestic or sexual violence. And we watch them as women in solidarity as they're dragged through what feels like a cruel, degrading system, rather than the victims that they actually are, all the while being judged by the public opinion as well as their peers in court. So we have to act now. Governments have to prioritise prevention at the root causes: misogyny, inequality and poverty. Education must teach respect, consent and equality to break the toxic mindsets that are underlying in our communities. And we need stronger laws and enforcement. Too often we see mitigating circumstances allow men walk free with suspended sentences. And finally, Chair, we need to support survivors, and that's non-negotiable. Shelters, counselling, legal aid, they're not luxuries, they're lifelines that women need. Thank you.
Ďakujem a poprosím kolegyňu Lakoš. Nech sa páči.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lakoš.
Tisztelt képviselőtársak!
Honourable colleagues, let me show you a hand sign. Why is it important in August in Hungary, there was a special event which sheds lights how a simple gesture can save a life. A young woman asked for help from a shopkeeper by hand signs, and the shopkeeper managed to understand what was the message of these signs. The woman gathered courage to ask for help while the harasser was present. This sign is of three, there are only three movements of the hands. It was enough for the shopkeeper to call the police, who saved the woman from the situation. This case shows that prevention is key and education is key. There are new regulations in the EU from 2024 which call for harsher punishments for both off and online harassment of women. But daily practice and attention should prevail. Home, love and safety should be given to women at home, and we are all responsible to ensure this.
Dankeschön. Wir kommen zum Catch.
Thank you very much. Now catch the eye. Mr. Hoyzik has said that not everyone can take part. He had to select from those who put their hand up. We'll start with colleague Berniak, and then colleague Mai can get themselves ready.
Kolegin Berniak.
Poštovana predsjedavajuća, danas obilježavamo Međunarodni dan borbe protiv nasilja nad ženama.
Ladies and gentlemen, today is a day where we see that we recognize the violence that happens against women. And even in the EU, it's terrible. Worldwide, 1 in 3 women have experienced violence, and it's not much better in the EU. In many countries, we see a huge number of women who experience violence during their lives, and then they have reported that to the police. This shows that we need to raise awareness. These are not just statistics. These are women's lives who suffer injustice, who suffer due to a system. They are the victims of violence. If we look at 2024, some countries still haven't ratified all the necessary conventions, including Istanbul, and we have done a lot of work. We must ensure the implementation and enforcement of laws. Violence against women is not a personal problem. It is a societal issue, a wound that we must deal with. Thank you. Thank you very much, colleague Mai. After that, colleague Tunkunen.
Nu doet hij het. Dank u wel. Dank u wel. Sorry, dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you very much, Chair. Now, every woman knows another woman who's suffered violence or has suffered violence herself. 1 in 3 women in Europe is a victim of sexual violence. And this is 75 million women, but only 1 in 8 actually reports it. Why? This shows how we in society deal with violence against women. We ask them if they said no. We ask them why they didn't go home earlier. We ask them if maybe they were asking for it. And with this, we're placing the responsibility on the victim and not on the perpetrator. If we want to end violence against women in Europe, then we need to take action. We need to listen to the girls and the women who are suffering it. We need to ensure that our legislation means yes as its basis in the definition of sexual violence. And for those organizations which help and support women, we need to continue to support them to ensure that we can continue to speak out and we can finally put an end to violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is colleague Tinkanen, and then Miranda Paz.
First, colleague Tinkanen.
Entschuldigen Sie.
Could you give the mic, please? Yes.
Thank you. Arvoisa puhemies, kun puhumme naisiin kohdistuvasta väkivallasta, on äärimmäisen
When we speak about violence against women, it's important to recognize where on this planet Yes, microphone, please. Although we have to do more in Europe in order to deal with violence against women, we may take steps forward here in Europe, but one ought not forget that the problem exists elsewhere as well. And one has to not forget, of course, that the voice of women has to be heard. There are migrants who come here to Europe, and it may be that in the future we will no longer be a haven, a safe haven, a place for women. So we have to say no to the Islamization of Europe.
Danke. Jetzt spricht die Kollegin Mir.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Miranda Paz. So that is seat number 186, so that the microphone is turned on. Then it will be colleague Oliveira.
That's the next one, so they can prepare. (186), please. 186, please. Now it's working. Now it's on.
No? Muito obrigada, Presidenta.
Thank you very much. Sexist violence is present in the streets, at work, in schools, in our homes, in the press, in politics too. We must combat sexist violence with laws, with media, with measures, with resources and with education. On this day, today, the 25th of November, is the day of eliminating violence against women. And let me talk to the extreme right. You negate what's happening. Your hate is an attack. Your impunity is an attack. This is hate which violates our rights as women. You defend the patriarchy here in this parliament. Shouldn't you be ashamed after all of the murders of women that have been happening throughout Europe? This sexist violence kills. Today, I support all the demonstrations in my country, in Galicia and in Europe, all of which are speaking out against sexist violence. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Auch ich muss auf mein.
Thank you very much. I had to wait for my mic there as well. The next is colleague Oliveira. Place 202, and then colleague Zipper can get himself ready.
The fight for a life that is free from exploitation and inequality is a long-standing struggle of humanity, but the struggle for women's rights is more of a recent struggle. And in many cases, even today, doesn't have real consequences. It doesn't really help women's lives. Domestic violence is a scourge. Prostitution, sexual violence, discrimination, attacks at the workplace, harassment, and the sexual and reproductive rights violations are just examples of the different forms of violence against women that we feel every day. They are those that suffer most in an unequal society that does not allow people to fully realize their potential. There's a law and there's realities which ensures equality in the workplace, in families, and in society. Violence against women requires policies and action, and this is urgently needed. The fight for the women's rights is a fight for democracy. Thank you.
The next colleague is Mr. Zipper, and colleague Carberry can ready themselves.
Liebe Mitmenschen.
So, co-humans, every act of violence against women takes a piece of their honor and their dignity away. Not seen as human beings, these women, but objects of the control, under the control of a father, a brother, or uncle. A quarter of a century ago, there was no legislation to protect women. Italy changed all of this in 2001. Germany 2002, Poland 2005. And today I know from all of my friends stories of attacks. 30% of women worldwide are victims of violence in a partnership, in a relationship. And I have never, of course, exercised any form of violence against a woman, but to my shame, limits have been stepped over by myself as well. But in 1 year, we do hope that the situation will ameliorate and there will be much less violence against women. That is our hope indeed.
Now, colleague Carberry, and then Ms. Grappini.
On violence against women are staggering. We have to remember that behind each and every one of these statistics, there are mothers, there's daughters, wives and sisters, each one deserving dignity and respect, and to feel safe, especially in their own home. I want to acknowledge the work of former MEP Frances Fitzgerald and our Minister for Justice Helen McEntee. Their leadership and dedication have been instrumental in advancing the fight against violence towards women, both in Ireland and in Europe. I also want to applaud organisations like Mead, Women's Refuge and Chochterman in Kildare, who provide vital support to those who need it. However, we cannot stop here. The work is far from finished. We must continue to fight for those whose voices have not been heard yet. In 5 years from now, I hope we can look back on significant progress made and one day proudly proclaim that Europe is one of the first continents in the world to eradicate violence against women. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Und jetzt bitte die Kollegin.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Grappini.
Doamna președinte, doamna comisar.
Chair, Commissioner, colleagues, this is an important day, International Day for the fight against violence against women. But we do this every year. In our country, we have very many NGOs, and the same goes in other member states. They are examining this issue, but we need more than figures. We need measures, and I will mention 3 concrete measures. We have to have a package that comprises education in order to fight violence in schools in all member states, because we speak of the freedom of movement. Then we have to allocate money for shelters, because women who are victims of domestic violence have nowhere to go. Especially in the newer member states, there are not enough shelters. And it's useless to just leave them there. That's why they don't even have the courage to unveil their problem. And then sentences. They are extremely low. Then the attackers are freed. So it's meaningless. So we would like to know what is the purpose of the measures we've taken against...
Thank you.
Ich bedanke mich bei Frau Kommissarin Dalli und darf jetzt Herrn Kommissar Schinas begrüßen zum nächsten Punkt der Tagesordnung, Erklärung der